I've known you now for over a decade, and if you say that this film changed your life, I got to know, what does that mean to you?
Hi, and welcome to Storia, where storytellers disrupt. I'm Fabiano Altamura.
And I'm David Noroña.
And remember, don't forget to like, subscribe, download, and leave us a comment.
So I'm excited to talk about, though the film came out in 2015, I think probably for its theatrical release, I think it's been kind of being pushed right now on Amazon Prime, on one of the streamers. And it's a film that came out in 2015, and it's called Mully, and it's described like this: a homeless orphan in Kenya becomes a lucrative businessman, which by the way is an understatement, only to give it all up and open an orphanage that today serves over 2,000 Kenyan children. And it was directed by Scott Hayes. When did you first, because you actually recommended it to me.
Yeah. So I was doing a creative conference in Wichita, and it was the pastors there, Tim Fruits and Andy Womack, said, "You've got to watch this movie called Mully." And I was like, when people refer movies to you because it's the industry we're in, you're kind of like, okay, cool. Is it a faith-based one? Is it not? And he said, just watch it. So I watched it and it changed my life.
Okay, because I'm having a similar, you told me that I had to watch it. We haven't had time to talk about it. And I know that you didn't want to tell me too much, because you wanted me to have a fresh take on it. But I didn't know that it impacted you that way. I'm having a similar response to it. Let me just, before we dive into that, because I'm having a very similar response, and I'm so curious to explore that with you because we haven't had a chance. But so the basic premise of the film, without giving too much away, is yes. So to say that he was like a street kid is just like the understatement of.
But it's how he got there, though. That's the thing. Like, he's from a family, I think it was about 6. Dad was a drunk. So already in high dysfunction. One day he wakes up and his parents and his siblings are not there, and he's just by himself in a mud hut.
In the middle of nowhere. And again, we don't want to give away too much so that you can enjoy the take. But suffice it to say, because you'll see this if you watch the trailer, that he literally goes from being an abandoned African boy with a drunkard of a father who was also abusive to the mom. By the way, family alert there. We watched it with my 7-year-old, but we had to cover her eyes.
Oh, you did?
We did.
Wow.
I mean, mainly because we wanted her to see what God was doing in the film. Yeah. We anticipated there was a couple rough spots. It's nothing like, you just cover the eyes for a couple seconds and nothing lewd or anything. There's some abuse and some aggression that happens. But he then rises to become, it's got to have been
the head of oil and gas, I believe it was, for whole of Kenya.
High millionaire, maybe billionaire.
I don't know about billionaire, but definitely
hundreds of
exceptionally wealthy for that area. Absolutely in time.
I think by the description in the documentary, he was like basically held a monopoly over, because he was running the business well, not because of anything, duplicitous, had a monopoly over all of the oil and whatnot, petroleum products, I think in West Kenya.
Yeah.
Okay. We can't recommend you watch this enough. Specifically, like, I don't know if you're struggling in your faith, or if you need a kind of a refreshing reminder of who our God is. But I got to ask, man, you as a brother, I've known you now for over a decade, and if you say that this film changed your life, I got to know, what does that mean to you? What happened?
I think what really struck me was, for one, I love how Scott Hayes actually brought this to the public, and to show this amazing story. No idea how he got hold of the story, but stunning. So well done, Scott. I actually reached out to him on Instagram and he responded.
Wow.
The obedience to God.
By the gentleman.
By Mully.
Yeah.
I think when you look at it, because I'll give you a bit of the story, was what I love about him, he saw the injustice of where he was. So he was an orphan or orphaned, saw the street kids, had made all this money. Then he was so brokenhearted by what he'd seen. And this is the vow he made to God. He said, I will never make money again through business. So he'd gone from the absolute doldrums, absolute sewers, to the top that he could possibly get, was moved by what he saw and then decided to change it.
Which is not, for me, I get what you mean, because it makes it even more dramatic. I mean, it's one thing if you've never had it, but if you didn't have it to that extent, then you essentially had it all, then gave it all up, knowing what it means to not have anything. And when we mean anything, we're not talking about you don't have an Xbox.
No food.
Yeah.
He didn't know where his next meal was coming from, his next glass of water. In effect, had to knock on doors to actually get food, which we would see as some of the basest jobs working in the field. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like a Joseph story, somewhat, to me. You know what I mean? What he did, but that's not just where the story ends. The fact that he comes from the sewers and then has his heart to help the street kids. But like, hearing the voice of God, actually, the struggle it put in his family as well. He saved so many kids, but then what kind of, as revival hits his home, whatever, because all these street kids are coming in, people are getting saved, getting fed, what cost that had on his family.
Tremendous amount of cost.
You know,
I think you're right, man. I think the central theme of the film is obedience, God's hand. Yeah, I think I'm processing the same thing. I think for me, the other thing that it did for me was stir up boldness. Mm-hmm. It stirred up boldness of faith mm-hmm. in the face of full-on persecution, attack, loss, struggle. I think, you know, it's one thing to have like first world, you know, persecution.
Yeah.
You know, maybe getting your Twitter account canceled or something might qualify as, you know, first world persecution. But I think to have so little and to be so willing to follow God, here's what it got me thinking. This is what I've been thinking about after watching this film. I was thinking about where we meet God, the spaces in which we will truly meet God. And, you know, we've interviewed Sean Foyt. We've interviewed some pretty big mm-hmm. risk takers. And then watching this film as of late, I feel like the Lord is doing some acupressure, like just deep tissue massage on me. And I think he's reminding me that if you want to meet with me, if you want to sup with me, if you want to commune with me, I will be at the place of greatest risk, mm-hmm. not in the mm-hmm. cave. Mm-hmm. If you want to be with me, you can find me at the bush that is burning.
Yeah.
And I think personally, there's this weird thing that happens where you get lost by, you know, working as a part of a movement. And it's a wonderful movement. But I think I personally, and I take responsibility for this, I think sometimes you think, well, I work for a ministry or I work at a church. And somehow in a weird way, it's nobody's fault but my own, it starts to replace actual pursuit of God because you feel like you're working for him. But in some ways, though he never asked me to, I became his employee and I forgot to be his lover. Mm-hmm. And that's what this film has sparked in me is a tremendous boldness of faith to go, you know what? When we interviewed Sean in another episode, if you haven't seen that one, you should check it out. Mm-hmm. He talks about where we meet God in these dark places and how our response, our autoimmune response should be to worship.
Yes. But isn't that Storia 101 that when you get to the lowest point, you're expecting some sort of resurrection? Do you know what I'm saying?
It is, but right, isn't this like the irony of being a teacher sometimes that, you know, you teach acting or you teach writing and maybe you remember it when you do it in your craft, but that's not what we're talking about. I think the big thing I'm processing is, you know, in the Bible, when it goes from this verse to that verse, sometimes what we don't clock is 40 years.
Yeah.
It was 40 years. I mean, listen, we watched a 2-hour documentary, but that family, Mully's family, it was years and decades. Mm-hmm.
Probably the span of 50 years from when he was left until the point of where we see him now, where maybe he's in his early 60s. But what also stood out to me as well, even though I do believe the theme was absolutely obedience, what I loved about it was at no point did the Lord not resource him to do what God had called him to do. And I think what we find is that when God commissions us, he gives us the resource in our calling.
Mm.
And it doesn't always look easy, but like, I want to unpack more about this movie because it's hard to do it without saying them. Don't go and see it. I want to give it away. But I do think that to actually unpack the theme and to unpack the resource from the obedience is really important, because what happens is, you know, he says at that point of his encounter.
So this is a spoiler alert.
It is a spoiler alert.
If you're about to watch it, pause it, go watch the film, then come back. But
yeah, it's a spoiler alert. Like, in his obedience, in saying, I will never make money again from business, means I'm never going to make money again.
And he kept his word.
And he kept his word. So what that means, the skin in the game that he had was, I'm giving all of my resources, savings that I currently have to fund what the Lord has called me to do. It's not like he went out asking for money. He funded it himself. And, you know, inviting these thousands of kids to his house.
And Fab's not exaggerating, by the way. When he says thousands, he literally means thousands. Like every night he's going out on the street and bringing home not just one, but many, sometimes a dozen orphans just in one night.
Right. And I don't even know if he even knew what the cost was or the toll that it would take on his family initially. Initially.
Can I tell you on that one was a hard one for me. In fact, on the way to church, because I think we watched it as a family, like on a Friday or Saturday, then we went to church on a Sunday. And, you know, when you just kind of go quiet and then out of nowhere in the car, you go back and you process with your wife. And I said to her, how did you feel about that? And she's like, that was a hard one for me. I don't know whether it was right or wrong. I don't know whether we went too far. I've given up trying to judge those types of things. I know that I had a thought and a feeling when I watched it, because, you know, what's beautiful about what the director Hayes did was he included the kids. So it's not a singular voice. You get wife, you get parents, you get the kids' perspective. And it's a big family. I mean, he's got 6, 7, 8, 9 kids. You really get beyond a 3-dimensional look at the toll that it took. You also get the orphans. I mean, this is a multi-dimensional perspective on this man's life and his life of obedience. I think for me, but maybe I'm coming from more of a traditional ministry, this, that, or the other of, you know, we've also heard teachings about how, you know, it shouldn't cost the family that way. But I'll never forget, like, both Bill and Erwin McManus gave a similar response that I'm just now recalling that helps me process what Mully did. When I remember, because we got to just talk to Erwin McManus when Eric Johnson invited him up for a conference. And I remember somebody, I think it might have been Chris Cruz, said how he balances. He says, I don't know that there's necessarily balance. There's always a cost on either side. He said, and I've heard Bill say a similar thing. He says, no. My family does pay a price for me pursuing God. But there's a price, and there's also privilege. Mm-hmm. And what I've heard Bill express in his own way and Erwin say is, no. There's going to be moments where my family is going to be supremely, radically blessed by the fact that it's cost me over here. So this notion of like, it should never cost you. I don't know, when Sean Foyt takes his family to the Middle East or gets a gun put to his head. I mean, is that not a potential cost to him and his family?
Of course. I mean, look at our own lives. Has BCA not cost us?
It has.
You know what I'm saying? It's cost us. It's cost us. I mean, I'm not saying to the same level it cost Mully, but we put our money where our mouth was.
We did.
And we have skin in the game with this movement we have created called BCA. But I think that
it's a good point.
To think something isn't going to cost you, ideally it wouldn't cost you your family, but it usually costs you the closest to you. And when I say it costs you, he didn't lose his family.
He did not.
It was in the interim that it caused some level of instability, and actually it rocked their comfortable life.
It did. We won't give away what the ending looks like, because that we want to save for you. But you're right. Here's another spoiler alert, because this is the one that rocked me. You know the one that I'm about to say.
When they moved to the desert?
You just mentioned it to me. And I said, oh, wow, yeah, okay, cool, that sounds great. And I don't know if sometimes I've gotten numb because we're at Bethel and, you know, we get told about radical. But I have to say, so they move, because he's brought so many orphans home. This is another spoiler alert, so pause and watch the film if you haven't. Because he's brought now thousands of orphans home. The hundreds of acres that they were already living on, where they built structures and sewage systems and kitchens and so on and so forth, that's no longer enough. That's no longer enough. So now they move to an even bigger property. But the property is like in the equivalent of the Arizona desert in Africa.
Arid. I mean, there's no water there.
No water. So now they're driving 4 hours to Nairobi, which I've done. I've done the Mtwapa to not for water, but for my passport that I lost. Story for another day. 4 hours every day for water. And then I want you to pick up the story here. So he prays to God, and what happens?
So the Lord said there's water on the land.
And he wakes up one night.
Anybody has tried to drill and cannot find water.
They had a drill.
Mm-hmm.
They had an actual water digging, oil digging drill. Nothing. Not a drop.
Absolutely. Everybody thinks he's mind-blowingly bonkers.
And tell us about.
And then he has a dream and God shows him where the water is.
And he walks down this little path.
Mm-hmm.
And the Lord says, keep walking.
Mm-hmm.
And I love this picture. Scott Hayes does such a brilliant job of it. They have like a kerosene lamp, hand holding the wife. So you have covenant walking down this little path.
Right.
Because the wife, by the way, is one of the heroes of the film.
Yep.
Absolutely one of the heroes of the film.
I mean, you have to be to support that, right?
Never questioned her husband. And I don't mean this from a chauvinistic standpoint. I mean that she had, if not equal faith, greater faith in Mully, in both her ability to hear the Lord and his. Anyways, they walk down this path. He tells them exactly where to go, hang a left, points to the thing. The next day they start digging. And what happened?
And then the fact that they find water is only the smallest part of that.
Yeah.
Because nobody's been able to find water, yet he finds water. Again, second act of obedience. But from that on, it doesn't just change the land. The impact is far bigger.
We'll leave it at this. It literally changes the climate. And we mean that in every sense of the word.
But not just in terms of like the ecology.
Yeah.
It changes the economy.
It does.
So you've got one man who's an orphan that through hard work and obviously natural gifting becomes one of the top people. The Lord shows him a picture of the orphan. He wants to be a father. And literally from sheer obedience, he creates this movement that not only changes the people, it changes the ecology, the economy, and the fact that now these people are changing a nation. Thousands of people changing a nation. Why? Because when you father somebody that was an orphan, you're changing culture. And it takes time to change culture. But now those people are becoming doctors, accountants, people, government officials.
You talk about fish and loaves. If people were fish and loaves, this man. For me, I was deeply rocked. And it's not the first time. I think the film is truly anointed. It's when you watch the film, you're not just being impacted by a story. There's something eternal locked within that story. You know, I always think of like pieces, whether it's a painting or a piece of music, almost like these little, I don't know if you grew up in the 80s, we had these things called scratch and sniff, these little stickers that were,
and you would
scratch them and it would be strawberry. I think about the Lord's promise to inhabit our acts of praise, right? And we often tell our artists at Bethel Conservatory, whether you're a filmmaker, screenwriter, actor, music, theater, dance, that when we do our craft, write our thing, create our thing, our play, our piece, our musical, whatever it is, our film, that because we do that thing as an act of worship, the Lord promises to be in that thing. And I know it's a stupid little analogy, but it's like scratch and sniff. The next person that comes along and interacts with that piece of work gets almost the fragrance and the incense and the presence of God, because it's like I guess because he's infinite. He can choose to infuse and be a part of something forever. And that's what I felt. This film it was made in 2015.
I think it's created this legacy, right? Because I think that
that's a good point.
what I liked is I think Mully shifted and changed the structure of how I view missionaries now.
Really?
In the fact of, because traditional missionaries have
Yes.
lived from miracle to miracle, donation to donation. Right. Whereas when they found water changed the ecology, they started to become self-subsidizing, self-sustaining, but then created so much abundance that now they sold to major corporations.
Oh, it's ridiculous. I mean, to go from a desert to actually exporting.
I just think it creates a perfect model of how we should live. And the fact is now, because you become self-sustaining, you create a legacy now. And not only just create a legacy economically, you've created a legacy where all these people now are going out and changing the nation. That's what I want to see with BCA. I want to see every single art form that we've had. I want to see us fully resourced, and that all of our sons and daughters that came out, because listen, he may be losing his sons and daughters. He didn't, but he gained so many more.
He didn't. He gained thousands, and spoiler alert, more than half his kids have leadership roles
in the ministry,
which that's tremendous fruit. Tremendous fruit. When your kids want to come and work the Father's business, that's a tremendous legacy. It reminds me of the triangle. That you and I have been hanging out with the ladies, with our wives so long, and talking about Bethel Conservatory, that who knows, and it doesn't even matter because it's all from the Lord anyways, these ideas, these shapes and words and phrases that he's giving us, performing in the presence, right? Not for identity, but from identity. But there's this triangle that we sometimes share within Bethel Conservatory, 3 pillars or whatever, where we talk about creative revivalist, creative entrepreneur, and creative missionary. And as I was listening to you talk about Mully and the impact that his obedience had, it reminded me that different than just, and there's nothing wrong with donations. We receive donations,
of course,
and they receive some donations and all of that stuff. But I think the Lord prepared him as an entrepreneur because he was actually trying to reveal something about this flywheel, because he brought his business acumen
absolutely
to the mission field. And I have to say, when you watch the film, you will be struck by the creativity.
Oh,
the creativity and the ingenuity there's new technologies that came out of this.
It's just bonkers. And, his obedience from God, like what I think his kids, because, we think sometimes in our calling, as you said, a lot of the time we sacrifice kids and all this kind of stuff, and that's not the way it should be. But I think when you see a parent pursuing their God-given dream, it can't not but inspire your kids to follow suit.
I'll tell you, we've experienced that firsthand. And this is a story that I don't think we've shared on the podcast, but some of our students and staff know this. But this was about 6-7 years ago, just the year prior to BCA, which would have been 7 years ago?
Yeah.
In the planning year?
2016, yeah.
So my wife, like Fab's wife, Claire, his wife is Claire, my wife is Lisa. They're both dancers from different backgrounds. And my wife gave her body to being a mom for a decade. And we had 3 boys. And I'll never forget when we found out that we were pregnant with the child that would become our daughter. I have to admit, and my wife is like super ninja birthing mom. Like, she loved being a mom. Those are some of her favorite memories, was being pregnant and having babies. And we almost had like Irish triplets because they were like less than 2 years apart and back to back babies. And then we had this gap, and every once in a while I would look at her in church when a little girl would walk by, because I had 3 sons and I love my 3 sons. But I have to admit that I had a little bit of an ache in my heart. I always imagined having a daughter and walking her down the aisle. But here's the deal. When we found out that we were pregnant, there was a mourning for my wife. Because after 10 years of investing her body, which women do literally and figuratively towards, and especially, I don't know if it's especially for a dancer, but, having a belly and doing the thing and having your body, that's a very unique experience for a dancer. So we found out that we were pregnant. And at the same time, we were starting BCA.
Yeah.
You were there. We were actually in your home when I think we shared it or we processed it a little bit. Now, my wife as a dancer was looking forward to kind of getting back to work.
Yeah.
Maybe dancing, choreographing, teaching dance. Well, and now she's thinking, I'm going to be like 8 months pregnant here going into the school year. And then we chose her name, Talita, which comes from the Aramaic for little girl. And I will never forget the word that was prophesied in that room. And I can't even remember whether it was you or Claire. It may have been Claire. This phrase, I will keep with me in my heart, like Mary, pondered it in my heart and take it to my grave. But one of you prophesied that she was the daughter of redemption.
That was Claire. Would have been Claire.
It sounds like your wife.
Yeah, it totally was.
She was the daughter of redemption. And if you know the story of what happens with Talita, the little girl, because it just means little girl, who had fallen asleep or died, and Jesus comes and says, little girl,
arise.
Talita kumi.
Kumi, yeah.
Arise. And what we didn't know, maybe just like Mully didn't know, was that where we thought it was an arid desert, where we thought it would be hard ground to plow, there was actually resurrection in life, because that's what our God does. Our God speaks life over dry bones.
Pretty crazy, dude.
That's it. It's just a documentary you need to check out.
You do. You can watch it on Amazon Prime. I'd highly recommend it. If you're feeling kind of any doubt that God isn't in direct pursuit of you, or that God doesn't have a dream for you, and God doesn't have resources for you, and he can't do immeasurably more than you can ever think, dream, or imagine, you have to watch this documentary, because it's revival lifestyle in person, watching it. You can see it unfold. True story. It's just something that I think everybody should watch at least once.
It'll change you. Guys, as always, check out Mully. He is a disruptive storyteller who disrupted the narrative of thousands of children and generations to come. Check it out. So good hanging out with you.
See you next time.